Greetings, I'm Reverend Yue McCormick, Head Minister of Enduzan, Perfect Dragon Mountain, Shinganji, True Vow Temple, of the Nichiren Shu Sangha of the San Francisco Bay Area. This presentation is the second part of a three-part series on the life of Tiantai Zhiyi. This presentation will continue our review of the life of Tiantai Zhiyi, the founder of Tiantai Buddhism. This is important because Nichiren was ordained and trained as a Tendai monk, so many of his teachings and arguments are incomprehensible without at least a rudimentary understanding of Tiantai Buddhism. In this presentation, I will briefly cover the life of its founder, Zhiyi, who lived from 538 to 597, from the time of his studies with his teacher Huisi to his retreat to Mount Tiantai. When we last talked about Zhiyi, he became the disciple of Nanyue Huisi on Mount Dasu. Zhiyi was 22 when he first met Huisi. He stayed with him until 567. While there, Huisi taught him to practice the Lotus Samadhi repentance rite that was based on the Lotus Sutra and the contemplation of the Universal Sage Bodhisattva Sutra, the closing sutra of the Threefold Lotus Sutra. This would be described by Zhiyi in the Great Calming and Contemplation as one form of the both walking and sitting samadhi. His practice was also based on Chapter 14 of the Lotus Sutra, Peaceful Practices, which taught the four peaceful practices of peaceful deeds, peaceful words, peaceful thoughts, and peaceful vows. Finally, he was taught the samadhi of following one's own thoughts. Being mindful of one's thoughts throughout the day was later described as one form of the neither walking nor sitting samadhi and the great calming and contemplation. Let's take a closer look at the four peaceful practices from the Peaceful Practices chapter of the Lotus Sutra that are emphasized in the Tiantai practice. They are taught for bodhisattvas who wish to expound the sutra in the evil age after the final nirvana of Shakyamuni Buddha. Peaceful deeds consists of performing proper practices and approaching proper things. Proper practices mean to be patient, mild, and meek, not rash, timorous, or attached to anything. It means seeing things as they are. It also means not to be attached to non-attachment or to seeing things as they are. Approaching proper things means not to approach others for gain or with ulterior motives, but instead to make it a pleasure to sit in meditative absorption and to know that all things are insubstantial. In other words, the practice of calming and contemplation of emptiness. The practice of peaceful words consists of not pointing out the faults of other persons or sutras, not despising other teachers of the Dharma, not speaking of the good or bad points or merits or demerits of others, not mentioning voice hearers by name either when praising or blaming them, not giving in to hostility when speaking, having a peaceful mind so as not to offend others, and not to respond to questions with Hinayana teaching, but only with Mahayana teachings, and to induce others to arouse the awakening mind. The practice of peaceful thoughts consists of not nursing jealousy against others, or flattering or deceiving others, or despising fellow Buddhists, or getting into disputes, but instead being unbiased, having great compassion, and looking upon all Buddhas as loving fathers and all bodhisattvas as great teachers. The practice of peaceful vows consists of having great compassion for the laity and the monastics, and making the following vow for those who have not heard or believed in the Lotus Sutra, and thereby become bodhisattvas. The vow is, they do not hear this sutra, they do not believe it. This is their great fault. When I attain the enlightenment of the Buddha, I will expound the Dharma to them with expedience and cause them to dwell in it. Another thing Zhiyi learned during his time with Huisi was the threefold contemplation in a single mind. This had been taught to Huisi by his teacher Hui Wen. The threefold contemplation in a single mind means to simultaneously observe the emptiness, provisional existence, and middle wayness of phenomena in a single thought moment. Because he is credited with this threefold contemplation, Hui Wen is considered the first ancestor of the Tiantai school, his disciple Huisi the second, and Zhiyi the third. In 567, Zhiyi left Mount Dasu for Wagwanse Temple, the Tile Office Temple, in Jiankang. Jiankang was the capital of the Chen dynasty, the successor to the Liang dynasty in southern China. The ruins of Jiankang are now to be found in the municipality of Nanjing. Zhiyi stayed at Wagwanse Temple for 8 years. There he lectured on the Lotus Sutra, the great perfection of wisdom treatise attributed to Nagarjuna and translated by Kumarajiva, and gave a series of lectures that became the elucidation of the sequential method of the perfection of meditative absorption. This latter could also be called the On the Sequential Method of Zen. This work describes the gradual and sequential method of calming and contemplation. Notice that Zhiyi's early teachings about practice use the term jhana, or meditative absorption. In Chinese, this was called chan, and in Japanese, zen, and became the term used to this day by the Zen school to indicate the practice of silent sitting that combines both the calming practice that leads to the jhanas, or meditative absorptions, and the contemplation practice that leads to prajna, or wisdom. Later, however, Zhiyi started to use the term shamatha vipassana, which means calming and contemplation. He did this because he wanted to make it clear that both the calming that leads to meditative absorption and the contemplation that leads to insight or wisdom are integral to Buddhist practice. He perhaps felt that using the term jhana or Zen would cause people to overemphasize calming or meditative absorption, whereas the term shikan indicates a more balanced and integrated approach of both calming and contemplation. Despite the success of his lectures and growing fame at Wagwanse Temple, Zhiyi longed to return to a more solitary practice deep in the mountains. To that end, he left Jiankang in 575 at the age of 37, despite the protests of his disciples and even the Chen Emperor Xuan, who all wished for him to stay. He entered Mount Tiantai in what is now Zhejiang province. Once there, he established Shuchanse Temple. He would remain there for 10 years. Elsewhere, dynasties were rising and falling, and the future of Buddhism in the north began to look very bleak. The northern Zhou dynasty was founded in 577 when the regent Yuan Hu forced Emperor Gong to abdicate in favor of Yuan Jue, the son of his uncle Yuan Tai, who had been the supreme general of the Western Wei forces until his death in 556. Yuan Jue became Emperor Xiaomin, the first emperor of the northern Zhou dynasty. He lasted less than a year. As a regent, Yuan Hu remained the real power in the kingdom, and when Yuan Jue plotted against him, Yuan Hu deposed him and then executed him. Yuan Hu then put Emperor Xiaomin's older brother on the throne as Emperor Ming. 3 years later, in 560, Yuan Hu, fearful that Emperor Ming might move against him, had him poisoned. Emperor Ming's younger brother then took the throne as Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu was more circumspect, but in 572, believing that one should do unto others before they do unto you, he murdered Yuan Hu with the help of his brother Yuan Ji. Starting in 574 and lasting until his death in 578, Emperor Wu instituted a persecution of Buddhism. In 577, Emperor Wu conquered the territory of the northern Qi dynasty, bringing all of northern China under his rule. There is speculation that one reason for Zhiyi wanting to leave Jiankang is that it was feared that northern Zhou would soon march against the Chen, and that the persecution of Buddhism would extend throughout all of China. However, Emperor Wu died in 578, and the persecutions came to an end. Emperor Wu's son became Emperor Xuan, but gave the throne to his son less than a year later. During that time, he initiated an attack against the Chen to seize back Qi territory they had taken in 577. Emperor Xuan then died of illness in 580. Emperor Jing was only 6 years old when he took the throne, so his grandfather on his mother's side, Yang Jian, ruled as regent. In 581, Yang Jian had Emperor Jing and the rest of the Yuan clan put to death and established the Sui dynasty as Emperor Wen. The persecution of Buddhism under Emperor Wu, the Northern Zhou dynasty, began when Wei Yuansong, a Buddhist novice from Sichuan, went to Chang'an, the capital of the Northern Zhou dynasty, to seek his fortune. In 567, Wei Yuansong submitted a memorial to Emperor Wu, claiming that the Buddhist Sangha should be purged of corrupt monks and nuns, that the building of stupas was wasting the treasury of the empire and should be stopped, and that statues and images were not worthy of worship and should be destroyed. He went on to suggest that the distinction between monastic and householder should be abolished, that Buddhism and secular virtue were no different, and that the emperor should be considered to be the Buddha. Emperor Wu had been looking for an excuse to rein in the power of the Buddhist establishment, so the memorial was quite timely. Wei Yuansong was rewarded with the title of Duke of Sichuan, and he left the Sangha and returned to the fold of Taoism. Wei Yuansong and a Taoist priest named Zhang Bin continued to advocate the suppression of Buddhism, and in 574 Emperor Wu issued a decree prescribing Buddhism. Throughout the region ruled by the Northern Zhou, from 574 until Emperor Wu's death in 578, countless stupas, statues, and shrines were destroyed, more than 40,000 temples were confiscated, and millions of monks and nuns were laicized. Ironically, Emperor Wu also proscribed Taoism because it had come to his attention how much the Taoists had modeled themselves on Buddhism. Wei Yuansong certainly serves as a vivid example of a former monk returning to Taoism, using Buddha's teachings to further his own agenda, and then turning upon Buddhism itself. It was during this period at Mount Tiantai that Guanding became Zhiyi's disciple. Guanding became Zhiyi's attendant and went on to record and compile Zhiyi's lectures. His relationship to Zhiyi was analogous to that of Ananda to Shakyamuni Buddha. He also wrote the profound meaning of the Nirvana Sutra and the annotations on the Nirvana Sutra, two works that Nichiren Shonin often cited. Guanding would succeed Zhiyi as the fourth ancestor of the Tiantai school, if Wei Wen is counted as the first. He would be known as the great master Zhang'an. With that, I bring the second part of this three-part presentation of the life and teachings of Tiantai Zhiyi to a close. I hope that this presentation was helpful and informative and will help to enrich your faith in and practice of Nichiren Buddhism.